Hello, happy
Hello.
Monday, and welcome to this week's episode of the This Is Not Therapy Hour, streaming on Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube, and rebroadcast on YouTube every Wednesday. Nice to be with you both. Hi, Caitlin. Hi, Brandon.
Well, good to be with
Hello.
you.
Good to be with you.
Um, for the benefit of anybody watching for the first time, this is the This Is Not Therapy Hour. This is the. Um, which is an open conversation, a chance to have a chat with Brandon and Caitlin about all things neurodiversity and mental health. I will ask questions on behalf of anybody who's here in the chat, or we'll come up with a topic. We'll see where the conversation takes us. But if you have any questions or comments, you just pop them in the chat and I'll put them to Brandon and Caitlin. We all work with Effective Artistry. Brandon is clinical director of Effective Artistry, which is a therapy practice based in Northbrook, Illinois. Caitlin is a therapist with Effective Artistry, and I work remotely as an executive functioning coach. So if you're looking for a therapist in the state of Illinois, get in touch. And if you're looking for an executive functioning coach anywhere in the world, as long as you have good internet connection, we'll be happy to work with you. Even if you have a rubbish internet connection, we can find a way.
Those are fun too.
Pardon?
Those are fun sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. You just got to go with it. So, I think that's the usual housekeeping commentary out of the way. How are you both doing? It's been a couple of weeks.
I love that you just used the word rubbish. All my it's great. It brought me lots of joy. So I'm doing great because you said rubbish. Yeah.
I'm doing well. I feel like
that some of these words don't, words that you assume are kind of common don't actually translate across the pond. Yeah. Like we don't say stuff is trash here. We say rubbish. You said trash.
And rubbish is such a better word, but maybe it's just because it's foreign to me.
That's probably it. Yeah. It's
novelty, attention. Yeah. No, I'm well. I've had one of those I've been tired all morning. I was in a bad mood, trying to get myself out of it. Now I'm feeling a little anxious, but I'm not in as much of a bad mood. So I don't know. Weather. So I'm going to be mean to everybody today. Just kidding.
Ooh.
Okay, bye.
I wish I could do that. I'm just going to walk.
So, what are we talking about today? What's been on your mind?
Good question. And I wanted to check again just to see if the person who wanted to talk about speech delays is here.
Oh, yeah. I don't
Because
see
whenever
any.
they next show up, I'll try to make sure that that's what we talk about. If you're here, let us know.
Yeah.
What's been on your mind other than
that? Everything. All the time.
Do you want to pick one or say the first thing? I'll do it too if you don't want to.
How about you do it and let's see if I think of anything to say after you say something.
Well, today I've been very in my head this morning. And so I've been thinking about kind of that, like attention distributed when people get in their head, basically, for short, simple phrasing, being in your head. And when I get in my head like this, it tends to be about that I'm trying to intellectually or cognitively solve a physical, or the word I really want to use is phenomenological problem, like something that in my experience, right now, I feel like my chest is a little tight or whatever. And then instead of kind of just acknowledging that and moving on, sometimes I'll get into, well, why? Why do I feel that way? What's been going on? I shouldn't feel that way. Is something wrong? I should do that, and think, and makes it worse, at least sometimes. So that's what I've been thinking of this morning, but I have lots of thoughts about other things. I'm always thinking lots of stuff. If that doesn't grab anybody, I'm just putting things out there until someone jumps on something or offers something. Marie, you're welcome to offer something too.
Well, I've been having a weird week where I don't want to do any of the things I have to do. And I just want to play this weird computer game I found. instead. So that's where my attention is going.
What game is it?
It's called Terraformers. It's basically like a Mars colonize and terraform Mars kind of game. It's just point and click and see what happens. But yeah, I know that I'm also in my head. I'm overwhelmed with like housekeeping tasks I need or chores I need to catch up on, and I don't know where to start. I need to declutter. And so instead of doing any of it, I just turn to the screen and look at the screen instead of looking at the mess behind me because it's easier.
Okay, I want to talk about this then.
Yeah.
I think there's some things here. And also for me too, so not that this is going to mean anything to the two of you probably, but Baldur's Gate 3 was released about a week and a half ago. It's a follow-up to a very famous Dungeons and Dragons based computer game. The first one was in like 1998 or something like that. And the second one was also like 20 years ago. And I'm not in a place where I was when I was younger, so I can't play it the way that I used to. So it's really like I'll think about it throughout the day or not be able to play it at all in a given day. Or if I can, it's for like a half an hour or an hour at the end of the day after the kids are in bed. Mm-hmm. So a similar thing where I'm thinking about it, but not always engaging with it. It sounds like what that might be matching your experience at the terraforming game.
Yeah.
I feel that way about a book right now.
What book?
Enchantment, Awakening Wonder in an Anxious Age by Catherine May, who is a UK-based writer who lives in Whitstable by the sea, and she, oh god, and she
You're just sharing your whimsical details that tickle your fancy here.
Yeah, and also she actively identifies as being autistic, and she was a late diagnosed autistic woman and has a great autism resource page on her website. And this is the list of facts I would like to share in this moment.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Marie, I have been thinking this for like months. I'm going to ask you, do you know who Catherine May is?
No.
Okay, that makes me feel better because I was in my head and having anxious spirals about it. So.
You're having anxious spirals about whether Marie knew who this person was?
Because I shared on our G-Chat a few times stuff about Catherine May, and I thought Marie would really resonate with it, and she didn't comment on any of it. And then I was like, uh-oh, do I like not know about blah, blah, blah? So
I think I commented on one of the pieces. Yeah, but like a Substack article you shared.
Oh, you did?
Lovely. Yeah.
This
about
is
feeling like she had to be all things to all people.
It was like a 7-year, like my life turns into fire, and then it was so good. But this is a great example of my brain's propensity to assuming that people don't like me all the time and then making lovely stories about it that are actually pretty extensive. So thank you, Marie. This is a great example of something. Handing it to Brandon.
I know. I can tell you're handing it to me, and I want to like comment and respond to what you're saying, but I also am reading that you don't want to talk about what you're saying.
Oh, well, we can talk about the book thing. It's video games for you two, and it's a book for me. So what is it like to have something in our attention but not be able to actively engage with it?
Yeah, okay. Well, what is it like? I think people generally know what it's like, generally, but it's worth talking about. Because I do think, well, nice siren going by. Sorry about that. I don't even hear.
The village of Northbrook is having an emergency.
I was going to say, for me, the stuff that's in my attention that I'm not engaging with is the clutter and the housekeeping. And the computer game is like a diversionary tactic.
So people talk about it like that a lot, right? Like escapism or distraction or et cetera, et cetera. Especially when it comes to video games, but books certainly too. Really just like media consumption or anything that people consider to be like frivolous or honestly enjoyable. Because we mostly think of things that we quote unquote need to do as being things that are unenjoyable but beneficial, whereas things that we quote unquote want to do are enjoyable. we tend to assume that they're not beneficial, which I think is absurd.
Yeah.
Nothing is enjoyable to a person that isn't in some way beneficial to that person. But we've got this kind of like oppositional thing in our head that some things suck, but they're important and helpful. And some things are fun, but they're unnecessary and don't do anything. Which isn't how it works at all. It's not a distraction. And in fact, part of the reason that this is, theories here, but part of the reason that you might be struggling, including part of the reason that I might be struggling this morning, is because having something on your mind that you are not able to engage with to the extent that you're wanting to engage with it makes it very difficult to do pretty much anything else. It's like, if you imagine, I used to, when I was younger, I lived out west. I lived in Utah, and we would go on these backpacking trips and like hiking through the desert for, days at a time. And the level of thirst that I would get to on those trips, because you can only carry so much water with you, and it's heavy and blah, blah, blah. You get thirsty to a certain extent, and it's hard to think about. I mean, you're in this beautiful area and all these other things, but all I'm thinking about is I'm thirsty, or my feet hurt, or how far until we get to the campsite, or whatever. Mostly not, hopefully, but every once in a while.
Yeah.
And no one questions that. No one would say like, oh, you're getting distracted by how much you're thinking about wanting to drink water. There's some function that it serves me to address that thirst. The thirst is a sign, right? Like there's something happening in my body that there's less water than is optimal or beneficial or whatever for processes. And we can't like monitor our cellular activity on the level of like, oh, my water level is a little low. So the version of that we have is just feeling thirsty. And we all kind of generally get that, and you drink water and things get better. Wanting to play a video game, wanting to read a book, wanting to take a nap, it's just another version of that. There is something going on where, at least theoretically, that would be beneficial to you. And we don't monitor it on the mechanical, like, what exactly is it that this thing, blah, blah, blah. We just feel the desire, the urge. And I want to make sure that I'm clear. We're wrong about this stuff all the time. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't serve a purpose.
I've noticed a pattern with clients where the things that they feel bad about doing, that they technically enjoy, that they technically get something from, are usually things that do not involve being productive in a traditional sense, which oftentimes means working. Or if they're like an artist, like creating art, and anything else other than maybe cleaning their house or something like that is okay to do.
As long as it's not something that they think would be enjoyable, then it's okay.
Yeah.
Or if somebody else is depending on them to do that thing. Like my boss is waiting for a report, or I have to get paid.
So no matter how miserable I am, I must give my boss the report.
Well, I mean, there's reasons that people think that, some bosses, I mean, sometimes that's true. That if you don't, you'll get fired, and that's going to make it even worse for you or whatever.
I guess the pattern with my clients, who tend to be more of like overachievers or whatever we want to call it, is like that if they don't go above and beyond at the workplace, where it's like way beyond getting fired, it's like
disappointing someone? Yeah,
disappointing someone in any way, that they are failing, and they need to ignore their physical, emotional, and body and mental need, like everything. Ignore the needs until you do the thing. Yeah,
I think, that happens a ton, but I don't think I think it's flipped the order, it's not, I need to work so hard that I better ignore all this stuff. There's no attention, no working memory space, no conscious decision made to ignore that stuff, which is part of the reason that the problems persist. If someone is struggling to work because they are tired, right? This is an actual thing that we all know self-evidently, that interestingly, there's research that backs this up, but also quite a bit of research that attempts to say that this isn't true, even though it is self-evidently true. That as you continue to think, you get more tired, and it becomes more difficult to continue to think. And it is hilarious to me that everybody knows this. It's something you experience day to day. And there is some research that shows that that's the case. And then there's a whole body of research trying to debunk it and saying, no, basically, if you have grit, if you choose to push yourself, you can push past it, and etc. As though for some reason the nervous system does not follow the physical laws of the universe like every other system in our body.
Yeah.
No one says you can continue to run forever as long as you choose to do so. Right?
Yeah.
I have a whole issue with grit specifically.
I keep wanting to kind of mention grit, but using different words, like sort of like it is admirable morally to push past your limits.
Yeah, be productive, be valuable. It is a belief that people, hard work. So some of these terms we keep throwing out, like productive. What do we mean by productive? What do we mean by work? What makes something work or productive? Two different things. I don't know which word you guys want to talk about first.
I think maybe productive is like, what do you think, Marie?
Yeah. Yeah, productive.
If I'm being productive or I'm not being productive, what is the defining trait which differentiates those two things?
I feel like achieving your intended outcomes within a reasonable time scale.
But what if your intended outcome is to play 2 hours of terraforming and you do that? Would you call that being productive?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. Because there's still a pile of laundry behind me that needs to get.
That's not your intended outcome, though.
What if it were?
I think it still would be productive, but we're so trained to not think that productive things are things that bring us pleasure.
Well, so productive, all right, words always, right? Like they have their intended or original kind of meaning, how the word was evolved. And productive means that you are producing something. So playing a video game would not count as productive generally because you're not producing anything.
But if so much work now is kind of like BS and doesn't exist anyway, then
when you're still producing emails or you're producing words in it. But I agree. I think generally the way that the word is used at this point is just to mean if I'm doing something that I should be doing, that's productive. And if I'm not doing something that I should be doing, that isn't productive. I just think it's always to me noteworthy to see where a word originates and how we kind of end up using it.
Yeah.
Because even in the original case of like producing something, the key distinction there is that you're doing something, you're creating something that is of value to other people. Because if an artist, for example, we have a lot of artist clients, if a visual artist is just doodling, they wouldn't call that being productive. Yeah. But if they're working on a commissioned piece, they would call that being productive, even though they're producing something in either case. So these days, mostly productive means I'm doing what I should be doing. And that's mostly defined, I think, by I'm doing something that has value to other people, that other people have said is a valuable thing for me to do. Which is fine. I'm not trying to like say that's a terrible, it's important to pay attention to other people and what they think and value. So then people try and kind of like do this sneaky backdoor thing where they say rest is productive. Because in order to be productive, I must be rested, which is great. That's better than thinking that rest is a waste of time. But I'd like for people to go even a little bit further than that to say that you don't have to justify the rest. In fact, the thing that needs justification is the productivity.
Yeah. That's a great point. I have lots of people in my life and clients who are like, if I exercise and eat well and get good sleep, then I can be more present at work and I can do a better job at work.
Like that's the point of life.
Yeah.
How does this tie in with the concept of demand avoidance?
Oh my gosh. Throwing a curve.
Yeah.
I am glad that you left off the other word, but we're going to throw it on there for people.
Dang.
Pathological demand avoidance is I'm going to say, obviously it's not clinically diagnosed. Well, actually it is. It's not in the DSM. It is not like an official diagnostic category, but it is a label that people will use to describe a certain pattern of behavior. And some diagnosticians, some like testers, psychologists, and will officially say someone is experiencing pathological demand avoidance. Now, I hate the concept. I hate it. It's such a problem.
This is why I asked.
Such a problem. Because what it is used to describe is primarily, as with most, like with autistic and ADHD and all these things, they mostly start when people are focused on kids, and especially kids in the educational, the academic environment, when they're not doing what they're supposed to do. So PDA is mostly applied to kids. That's where most of like the theories around it came out. And it's just when you ask somebody to do a thing and they refuse, to the extent that it causes them problems. That's why it's pathological. That they like, if someone's like, well, someone tells me to do a thing and then I don't want to do it, that's pathological demand avoidance. First of all, there was already a term for this beforehand. It was called oppositional defiant disorder. It is in the DSM. It's still in the DSM. Although, tellingly, you can't apply that label to someone over the age of 18, which is part of the reason that PDA has become more popular, because adults use it too. But it's a ridiculous concept to pathologize someone saying no to a demand. Nobody says no to all demands. Nobody. I don't care how much you think you are struggling with PDA. There are times when people say, hey, and you look at them like that's a demand for your attention. So when we say it's pathological demand avoidance, we're ruling out that anything about the demand or the person making the demand or the context in which the demand is being made might be impactful. We're saying it's all about the individual. They have some pathology, so nobody else needs to pay attention to what they're doing, which is nonsense.
It would be helpful to just call it like executive dysfunction?
It gets called that too, and that's better.
It seems better.
But that also still places it on the individual, as though the demand should be fulfilled, and if it's not, it's something that's dysfunctional.
But isn't a true sort of, I don't know, looking into executive functioning, wouldn't it be looking at the environment and the other people?
Well, executive functioning technically is something that takes place only within the individual.
No, but if you were doing like an appraisal and talking about how to get the thing done that they're trying to get done, you would acknowledge the environment and the other people as things that are contributing to you not getting the thing done.
I would. We would.
We would at Effective Artistry.
Generally, no, that's not how it's talked about. Yeah. Executive functioning, even here, we would. It is a set of hypothetical cognitive processes. So it's something that happens in the individual's brain.
Yeah.
Now, if things are going differently than somebody wants it to go, then of course we would want to look at the environment and the context, as well as we're not ignoring the individual, but in addition, you want to look at the other things. But no, generally people are looking for a way to be able to put a label on the individual. Imagine that you are, because educators by and large, I mean, I know tons of them, they're wonderful people. They genuinely and deeply care about their students and doing the best that they can to support their students.
Yeah.
These are not a bunch of jerks that hate kids, and that's why they decided to go into a low-paying field where they need to get higher education than most people who make a lot less money than them. You know, like, it's not an easy job.
Yeah.
Now, when you are that person and you are in a position where you are expected to accomplish a certain set of things with a classroom full of, let's say, 20 kids, you're not going to be able to do that all the time. But that's not accounted for, right? Like in the way that you as a teacher get evaluated, in the way that the kids get evaluated, nobody's taking into consideration like, well, yes, obviously it is impossible for someone to accomplish all the things that we're asking them to accomplish. An A is an A, and anything less than that is less than that. So you have these kids, and of course, neurodiversity, the lens of neurodiversity, I think is very relevant here. But the idea of neurodivergence or not doesn't matter. Different kids are different, whether they're neurodivergent or not. You cannot structure a day or a lesson in a way that's going to work equally well for all 20 of those kids. And you just don't have enough. So you can't get every kid to accomplish everything that you're supposed to be accomplishing with them. And when you notice that, and you notice a kid struggling, you try things. Well, maybe it's this. Let me try this. Well, maybe this will help them. Let me try that. And you try these different things. And it's not working, it's not working, it's not working. They're still not accomplishing what it is intended for them to be accomplished, or you're not accomplishing what you're supposed to be accomplishing with them. At a certain point, you run out of ideas. You say, I've done everything I can do. At this point, it's on them. Like, I can't I can't go home with this child every day and make sure that they do their homework. I can't talk to the administrators and tell them that we need to stop issuing homework to students and change our grading policy. I've hit the limits of what I am able to do or can think of to do. And that's when it gets turned into, yeah, this is on them. I'm doing everything I can. They have to make a change. And even though that's not always intended to be as like they're doing something wrong, and everything I'm doing is correct, even when somebody is thinking, yeah, I'd love to be able to support more, I just don't know what it is and I don't have that ability, and they're just going to have to try and meet me halfway or it's not going to work. Even when it's that, it tends to get translated over time into they're the ones messing up. And then the kid gets passed along to the next grade with the label attached to them and so on and so forth.
So sad.
It is sad. And it's not about the educator. It's not about parents when they're doing it. It's not about us when we're the kids or the kids themselves talking to the adult. It's not about any individual. It's just we're asking people to do something which cannot be done. You can't put 20 people in a classroom and have them all have the exact same experience. You can't predict what everyone's going to need through their whole life and make sure that everybody gets it. So we just need to accept that things can be failed without failure being a moral failure, right? That like, I'm intending to score 50 out of 50 on this test and I scored a 20 out of 50. I failed to accomplish my intention. That doesn't mean I'm stupid. And that's where it becomes a problem, because then everyone's looking to blame everybody else on why it's failing instead of just addressing the reality. Anyway, getting off on the whole thing. Productive is about making it so that other people are happy with the things that we're doing to the best of our ability to understand. Nothing wrong with that. But when it gets overvalued to the extent that I am not balancing it against anything else, all I'm trying to do is everything I can do to make everybody happy without anything balancing it well, then it becomes problematic. And yeah, pathological demand avoidance, oppositional defiant disorder, even ADHD in, I would say, most cases when it is applied to children. All of these are just ways to kind of offload, well, I've done everything I can do, and I don't think the kid's a bad kid. Because usually it's either, oh, the teacher needs to do more or the parent needs to do more. Or if that's not the case, then the kid's a bad kid, unless we can have this medical model workaround of saying, nope, kid's not a bad kid, teacher's not a bad teacher. It's just unfortunate that the kid is built in this kind of way where medically speaking, they yada yada. So that's why pathological demand avoidance is there, is because it makes it so that we don't have to say that the kid's just being a jerk. They have pathological demand avoidance. That's why they don't want to do it. But again, that falls apart when you recognize that everybody fulfills demands and nobody fulfills every single demand. So then we're really talking about, well, which demands are we saying are the ones that should be fulfilled and are pathological if they are not being fulfilled?
The ones we deem productive, right?
Yeah, it's really, again, it's kind of like a back door into setting boundaries, as opposed to just being able to say, nope, I'm not going to do that, without even having to rationalize it. But if you wanted to justify it, to say, I've got X and Y and Z going on already, and that's too much or whatever, it's no, I can't do that because of this condition that I suffer from.
I had a client who talked about that, and they were in a, how do I make this general? A college program that they absolutely hated being in. So then they were like, I have pathological demand avoidance. I'm like, you literally hate this. You hate the classes, you hate the homework, you hate the degree, like, but that's pathological. We just have to like it and get a bunch of stuff done that drives us crazy.
And in a lot of these cases, and maybe in this client's case, I don't know, but in a lot of these cases, it's the problem is that they're thinking they should enjoy it, but they don't. And then their solution, their attempted solution to that, is to push themselves harder, because maybe that will make them enjoy it, which makes them enjoy it less. So part of the problem is that in a lot of these cases, they did used to enjoy it. And so they're saying it's not, there must be something wrong with me because I was doing the same thing or pretty close to it, and I used to like it. And I just got to push myself to get back to that.
So then does it become acknowledging the conditions that are different from when they were doing it?
Oftentimes, I mean, when it is somebody who is pushing to a maladaptive extent,
Yeah.
right? When the issue is that you are tired and you're trying to solve that by pushing more and resting less, that makes the problem worse.
Mm-hmm.
But because we're not really allowed to think of it as tired, or, we have to then, if we do, we have to pathologize the tiredness, which is a big, like, that's part of what I've been struggling with this morning, is I've been getting some really good sleep, at least quantity wise, but I think quality wise too, for the last several days, more so than usual. And I still was very tired this morning. So then in my head, I'm saying, I shouldn't be this tired. What's wrong? Which is something I talk with clients will be like, well, what about when I slept one day for like 12 hours and I'm still tired? And I said, well, then you must have been really exhausted, because you wouldn't have been able to sleep that long in the first place if you hadn't been exhausted to a certain extent. And it doesn't just go away in one night's sleep or even a few days. But part of the problem with being tired is that it's hard to remember that for me. And I pathologize my tiredness. And then I'm in my head all morning being like, what's going on? Something must be happening with my body, or maybe I'm upset, or, whatever. As opposed to just recognizing, like, it's like if you got thirsty and you said, no, I drank enough water, I should not be thirsty, something must be wrong. Instead of just saying, well, I guess my evaluation that I shouldn't be thirsty must be the thing that is wrong, because I am.
And you are recovering from being exhausted.
Oh, yeah.
Like a week ago, right?
Oh, yes. I mean, for the past month and a half, but also on a broader scale, like for the past several years.
Yeah.
Including things like I haven't had my medication for a few days because they're behind, out of
really
stock
hard.
and whatever. Which, yeah. And to me, of course, this is just theorizing.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, that's not so much I've become dependent on it and now I'm, suffering withdrawals or whatever, that some people tend to think sometimes or worry about. To me, it's well, yes, I've been taking amphetamines, which like, if my exhaustion level is here, make it so that I get through the day at this level.
Yeah.
And then when I don't have them all of a sudden, it's not like I'm worse than I would have otherwise been. It's just, amphetamines do something for you, what I mean?
Yeah.
And not having them is going to feel like, oh, I'm not as rested or energetic or whatever as I usually am.
I feel like if they were addictive, I wouldn't keep forgetting to reorder my prescription.
Well, addictive is a whole nother thing that I think we're talking about. Because a big part, like on a practical level, this conversation, I think, around screens generally, screen time, downtime, video games, consumption, whatever. And people call that stuff addictive.
Yeah.
Which is like saying that you're addicted to food, which people do say that, or addicted to love, which people say that. It's a thing that is beneficial to you. It is enjoyable at the least, but it is enjoyable because there are evolutionary reasons as well as individual reasons that thing is something that you enjoy. So what are we talking about? Right? Like addictive.
I mean, the word balance comes to mind. Like, I do think some people use the word addicted to kind of like shame themselves, but I guess I can think of like maybe a client who is looking at screens and not doing a bunch of stuff that they now it sounds all shamey. I can't even finish the sentence.
Addicted is a word we only use to apply to things that we would consider to be a vice.
Yeah.
No one has ever said in any
people
serious
say
kind of way.
workaholic though.
And that sometimes is considered to be a vice. That is one of the few things where that people will say, I'm addicted, you're addicted to your work. But when we're saying that, we're talking about it being unreasonable.
Which is why the word
no one ever says you work 40 hours a week, you're addicted to your work.
And we're also talking about the impact it's having on people around you. Any of those behaviors that we deem addictive.
Yeah.
Like if you're addicted to your work, there's an implication there that you're neglecting something or somebody outside of
right. Work. Well, I think that's generally what's implied with the word addiction, is that it's out of balance, right? But that's a terrible word to use for that. And it doesn't get used that way. No one has ever, in seriousness, no one has ever said, I'm addicted to gardening, or I'm addicted to keeping my house clean, or
I wish.
Right. I'm addicted to watching the 5 o'clock news.
I will say though, with gardening and keeping your house clean, I have clients who will say, I feel like I have OCD tendencies because I garden for 2 hours a day, or like I clean for 2 hours a day. So that means I have OCD tendencies.
First of all, that's not what OCD is, although we can come back to that. The second of all, notice the difference. When we're talking about addiction, we're talking about the thing is bad, it is addictive, and it's pulling you into it. Those things, well, it's not bad to garden or clean your house, so it must be that I am bad. I have OCD tendencies.
Brandon just wants everyone to stop feeling like they're bad, and then the world would be such a better place, and that other people are bad.
I do.
No one's bad.
It's a very unuseful concept.
Yeah, it really is.
It's not that I don't think that people do things which I would say bad is an accurate label for it.
Yeah.
But
this is on the internet forever.
Well, no, I mean that. It's just bad is an unspecific, just like lazy or motivated. It's just unspecific. I'm a bad person. Well, what the hell am I supposed to do about that? But I have bad habits. Okay. You have to be more specific than that. So calling things bad just gets in the way, including when I say that's a bad person. Well, what is it about them? What are they doing? Or what is my understanding of them or theories about them that I would say qualifies them as being bad? Because bad is a vague concept we can't do anything about.
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to people feeling bad about who they are, it doesn't do anything.
So could you give an example of like a logical way for someone to talk about, let's say they drink like, I don't know, 4 or 5 cocktails a night, and they're usually drunk, and then they usually wake up with a hangover. What would you not use the word addiction?
It's not that I wouldn't necessarily use the word addiction. So first of all, to go back to addiction, what we're talking about there is if there's a dependency originally, meaning there are some things which impact you in such a, like alcohol, for example. If you drink it to a certain extent and then stop drinking it, you can just die. So there are things which create a physical dependency and which you will go through withdrawal if you do not. That's what addiction originally was meant to be applied to. Things that involve physical withdrawal. Anything that doesn't involve that, but it's just like emotionally satisfying, like gambling addiction, for example, or shopping addiction or gaming addiction. We're just talking about then that there's something that I enjoy and I do it, I engage with it in a way or to an extent that causes problems for me. Because talking about it, whether it's addiction, even in that example, well, okay, I might say, yes, that person sounds like they have an addiction to alcohol.
You would say that?
I'm saying I might. I'm hypothetical.
Okay.
And they might say, no, I don't. And then what? We're arguing over a binary of whether or not it counts as addiction. Who the F cares?
And then sometimes that client is like, screw therapy. I'm gone.
Right. Yeah. What they are saying is, I wake up hungover every morning. Oh, well, that sounds like a problem. Do you like that? No, of course not.
And that is more of like the harm reduction model too, where it's not about like sobriety.
Certainly, and yes, research through the roof that harm reduction is way better than abstinence. For many reasons, and one of those is quote unquote grit. You know, if an addict goes clean for 2 weeks and then relapses, and they say, dang it, I was doing so good. And then they're clean again for 20 years, and then they relapse. And then they might say,
sometimes it's even 20 worse.
Years. Right. They feel that much worse about it. Because they're thinking of it from that abstinence model. That obviously, if there's something I'm doing that I don't want to do, going 2 weeks between doing it is better than going a day. And going 20 years is way better than going 2 weeks. But if instead I think of it as, if I do this, I'm a bad person. Then going 2 weeks is like, okay, it's understandable. I'm not quite there yet. And going 20 years is like, even when I thought I was finally a good person, I'm still not. And it's worse. There's generally that idea of grit is a very fragile thing. Never quit, never give up. Goal-oriented persistence, goal-directed behavior, et cetera, is nonsense. You should quit. You should quit very fast. Because there's a flexible kind of grit where it's, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. and the tactic that I am trying to use in order to get there isn't working, so I quit it and find a different tactic to try and get there, instead of considering everything I'm doing to be an end in and of itself that cannot be given up on. That is what leads to people being miserable and exhausted.
So with the person who's drinking a lot of alcohol, it would be like, what are the specific consequences or like results of drinking it that you do not like? And then how do we change those things versus like, yes, you are an addict and you will forever be broken.
Yes, and generally what I would start with is observation. They generally know I'm hungover in the morning and it bothers me. Okay, I want more specific details. You're not hungover exactly the same every morning.
Yeah.
It doesn't impact you exactly the same every morning. So I want you to start keeping note, tracking exactly. So then they start to make, and then I want you to start tracking exactly what you're doing the night before in terms of when you start drinking, how much you're drinking, when you go to sleep. And we can start throwing in other variables at some point, like if they think that, oh, if I drink more water, okay, try drinking more water, let's see. And you track those correlations, and without us doing anything, they'll automatically start to realize like, oh, okay, well, when I start drinking earlier in the day and stop drinking a couple hours before I go to bed, it's much better. So even without modifying the amount that I'm drinking, if I just change the timing, that makes it better. Or if I take some Advil or drink water or whatever things might help. So we can address the symptom. But also, like Marie, why is it important that you tidy your apartment? Why does that, quote unquote, as you said, need to be done?
I have visitors arriving next week, so I want the place to be inhabitable for them as well as just for me and the cat. But I know that I feel better when my environment is tidy.
See, that all makes sense to me. And earlier you said you needed to do it, but now you're saying I want it to be tidy for the guests and I feel better when it is.
Yeah.
That's different than I need to do it, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Because if you think of it as I need to do it, which I'm not saying is an inaccurate thing. I mean, it is technically, linguistically, but it's not that you're bad for framing it that way. It's that how do you feel about the fact that you're not doing it is that you feel as though you're a failure. You're upset with yourself. Whereas if instead you're thinking of it as I want it to be tidy for the guests and it's better for me, well, then you're weighing options. Okay, I do better when it's tidier, but also it would be really hard to do it right now, and I would do better right now if I got to play the game out. Which thing do I care? Like which of those is better? Instead of, nope, this is what should be done and I'm failing. And therefore, even the thing I'm doing that is theoretically enjoyable is less enjoyable than it would be because I'm mad at myself.
I've had clients talk about similar things, and sometimes, and this isn't for everyone, obviously, this is just an example, but sometimes they'll be like, okay, I'm just accepting that I'm a person where when I have visitors, I clean the house the night before, and usually it goes totally fine and it ends up being beautiful and they love coming to visit me. And so instead of the need all the way up until the night before and the shame spirals and all of that stuff, it's like, I'm going to clean my house the day before and that's fine.
Yeah, so I love that. And a very, very common false correlation is that people think that stress gets them to do stuff. That is not true. It's never been true for any human in the history of the world. It can't even theoretically be true. It relies on a premise, which is problematic for this whole conversation, of motivation. That if I feel bad enough about something, then I will be motivated to do it. That is not how any of this works. Think about the times in your life when you have felt the absolute worst about something. Are you doing something valuable toward that end, or are you in bed crying and feeling miserable and doing nothing? Feeling bad does not correlate to action because that idea of motivation doesn't exist. You do not. That's a big part of this whole conversation is people think that they're motivating themselves by being mean to themselves. It doesn't work. We know what stress is. It's a physiological state. And we know what it does. It makes everything harder, especially anything that involves any element of cognition becomes way harder. The only thing that does better when you're stressed is fighting or running away. That's why we call it fight or flight.
So can you say what the reasons would be that you would tell a client as to why they have that pattern and why it doesn't make them bad in some way? I can't track like the implications you're trying to say.
It's a false correlation, meaning that by the time they do it, they are very stressed. Mm-hmm. Then they think that the reason they did it is because they were stressed. Mm. But what's really happening is, like in that case, most likely, of course, I'm guessing at specifics here, but generally speaking, what's happening is they have a task ahead of them that isn't enjoyable and they're not looking forward to doing, but is beneficial to do by a deadline. And they have an estimation of how much time and energy that task will take. And so when the time approaches where if I do not engage in it at this point, I will not accomplish it by the deadline and therefore will miss out on the value. So that's why it happens then. Now, because they also think they should have done it in advance, which this particular is so obvious in this particular example that is not the case. Because if you clean 2 weeks in advance, you got to clean again when they get there. There's no reason to think it should be done earlier. So they just feel bad. Yeah. And then when they get it done, they think it's because of how bad they feel. It reinforces the narrative, but it's not why.
Well, but would you say a less pathological way to approach it is like, this is when I just tend to clean and it's okay and there's nothing wrong with me that I cleaned the night before?
Yes, absolutely. Although I would go even further, and usually I do with clients, where I talk about, look, when you have a task, depending on what the task is, right? And I don't know, you guys tell me if you want to get into more detail about it, but I teach people ways to break this stuff down. But some things, for some reasons, are things where it is beneficial to engage with them before a deadline. Some tasks don't have deadlines. Those don't qualify for anything here because you can't talk about last minute when there's no deadline. But assuming the task has a deadline, some of those tasks, there are reasons that it's beneficial to engage with them well before the deadline. Some of those tasks, not only is it okay to do it at the last minute, it's actually optimal. It's better to do it at the last minute.
Yeah. And cleaning would be an example?
Cleaning would be an example. Most homework, especially writing assignments, are an example where doing it at the last minute is actually the optimal time to do it. Most tasks generally, where the reason you're doing it is because somebody else needs it done by a deadline and you have to give it to them or present it to them or they'll see it at that deadline. And it's something that you don't find enjoyable to do intrinsically. The vast majority of those things, it's optimal to do at the last minute. Now, I'm not saying that that's not going to stress you out, because it does sometimes. It doesn't have to, but that's work in and of itself, getting yourself to the point where you can wait without being stressed and feeling bad. But there are reasons that it's optimal, and you got to recognize that actually the pattern of your behavior is the optimal pattern, not because you're deficient or broken or bad, but because that is the thing that makes the most logical sense.
So then it's not just, this is kind of who I am and this is how I do things. It's like even more than that, which is like, this is literally the optimal way to prepare for a guest, is to do my thorough cleaning the night before.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I use the last minute as the describer because the night before might not be that.
Literally the last minute.
One of the problems that people experience with waiting until the last minute is they misevaluate what the last minute is, and they actually start too late, and then they miss the deadline. And then in their head, they say the problem is I waited till the last minute. Instead of, no, the problem is I made a mistake about what the last minute was.
So then would another way to approach that client be something like, what is the average amount of time it takes you to thoroughly clean your house to the level that you would like to before the guest arrives? And what is what are all the kind of maybe like the steps as well? And then if they say it's 4 hours and they have to work from 9 to 5 the next day and the guest is coming at 6, then you do it the night before?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, in addition to that, just some extra things. But yes, basically, that's beneficial not just for the reasons that we're discussing, but also because if they go, one of the very common reasons that a person isn't acting on a thing that they want to be doing or think they should be doing is because they don't have enough clarity around the idea of what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I'm supposed to clean, but they don't have more specifics. So part of the benefit is when you make them list it out like that it becomes more approachable. Part of the benefit is that I can see, some of these things actually, I could just do that a week in advance and it won't need to be redone. Some of these things I should be waiting until, like, I'm not going to clean the kitchen tonight and consider it to be cleaned by the time they get there or whatever.
Yeah.
So you can start to break things apart that way. but just generally bringing it back to observation and control for the person, away from this moralistic idea of I'm bad or good if I do it or don't do it.
Marie, do you feel some shame lifting off of you?
Of course.
Yay!
I've been thinking as well about sensory issues and how they can factor into people not doing something they feel they need to do. So for me, like vacuuming it's a total chore. I have problems with my back, and vacuuming seems to aggravate them, but also the noise of the vacuum cleaner drives me cuckoo bananas. So now I wear headphones and like listen to a podcast or an audiobook or something when I'm vacuuming. And
Vacuuming used to be, when I was younger, it was one of my like Saturday chores was to vacuum, and it scared me quite a bit. And I think we could talk about that as an auditory sensitivity, certainly. Yeah. But this is why I'm also pushing people to not need to justify. Like as a 12-year-old, do I need to justify that I'm feeling so anxious because of the auditory sensitivity? Like I would turn it on, vacuum as quickly as I could, turn it off, and then run away from the room to like where people were, and then go back later to clean, put the vacuum away and whatever. Yeah. Also, I've never liked doing dishes or cooking all that much, especially like chopping and prep and whatever. Well, I'm 6'5", and the height of the standard countertop is just such that I have to bend at an angle where my back starts killing me like 5 minutes in, even when I was 17 years old.
Brandon, that's pathological.
Even then, because it does get into things
where I made you laugh, Marie.
Then it gets into things where it's like, well, why aren't you helping out with the dishes as much as other people are without any recognition, even by me myself? Because I don't think about, oh, maybe it hurts my back more than it hurts other people's backs. I just know I don't want to do it.
Yeah. I realized a lot of that around cleaning lately because I have been very much judged by people in my personal life by my not cleaning. And I'm like, oh yeah, of course this bothers me. Like, just all the things. And so I know that's very general.
That's all right. But it seems like you don't want to get more specific.
No, I don't want to get more specific, but that's me trying to contribute.
The reason that I try and push people not to use the word need is because, like being a bad person, it's reductive and simplistic.
Yeah.
Well, why does it need to be done? Because it needs to be done. Because anytime that a person's reason for having to do something that they don't want to do or enjoy the thought of is, well, just obviously it has to be. That's not a reason. And if you're struggling to do something, but you think it has to be done, and if I say, well, why does it have to be done? And your response is, what a ridiculous question. It obviously has to be done. That's not a reason. And if you had a better reason, then maybe you would be able to engage with it in a way that would be more satisfying for you. Maybe you would be able to get it done differently instead of just continue to not do it and feeling bad. One of the reasons it's optimal to do these things at the last moment, if you're given an assignment, let's say, or hell, you're supposed to clean up for your guests coming into town, right? What if at the very last minute they call and they say, I'm so sorry, I'm sick, we're not going to make it in. Now it's disappointing because you were looking forward to having the guests, but it's even worse because you spend all this time cleaning up that doesn't even matter.
That's
anymore.
Happened to me before, and then I get mad at my friends, and I'm like, now I feel bad that I'm mad.
Whereas if you clean up at the last minute, then if they cancel at the last minute, it's still disappointing. And it's also like, well, I guess I don't need to worry about cleaning up now.
That's true.
If you are given a big term paper to do in college, this is only one of the reasons, by the way. There are many other reasons it's optimal to wait until the last minute. If you're given a big term paper to do in college, even something where you would say, there's no way this is going to get canceled. First of all, we just had a bunch of people get finals canceled within the last couple of years on multiple occasions at the last minute. It does happen. But even if it didn't, you can also die at any moment. You can get hit by a bus. And so if that were going to happen, and we don't want that to happen, and it's not fun to think about, which is part of why people make this mistake, because we'd rather not think about that. If that were going to happen, if you're going to get hit by a bus and die right before your finals, would you rather, theoretically, this is your last 3 weeks, would you rather spend a good chunk of that writing a paper that it turns out you don't actually end up needing to write? Or would you rather do things that you enjoy?
Yeah.
And again,
that's why everyone needs to move to Northbrook, because there are no buses here.
There are buses here.
I have bus.
Not compared to the city.
I have not seen any buses.
Yeah, not compared to the city for sure. And again, I'm not trying to make it saying like, oh, you might not have to do it is the only reason to wait.
Yeah. I do want to have a conversation maybe on the stream about, you said something about you don't feel like it's a useful thing. The question of like, if I die tomorrow, how would I want to spend today?
No,
but then I was trying.
I don't.
What was it?
It's the phrase "live today like it's your last." Live
like
each day like it's your last.
Okay.
That's not smart.
Okay.
Do not live each day. Because then you would not do anything which plans or prepares for the next day.
So I'm guessing that it would be a conversation where you would say, what does that mean? And then end up getting more specific into something like
it's really just balance, you know.
Balance. Okay.
Honestly, to me, I think tension is a better way to talk about it than balance. Because balance implies that it's like a balance beam and you can make it so that you never wobble if you perfectly balance. Where I think it's more like when you drive, where it's like, it's impossible because the road shifts and winds gust, you know, there are things outside. It is impossible to make it so that you never, ever go off center. So it's really just about monitoring and when things, you know, small, slight adjustments. And if you stop paying attention or fall asleep or whatever, then when you check back in, you might have to make a real sharp adjustment real fast, which is unenjoyable. But it's tension. There's not balance. It's you're getting pulled in this way and, oh, that's a little too far. Let me pull it back. Oh, that's a little too far. And so I'm often advocating on the side of like be more engaged with the things you enjoy and rest more and whatever. But I'm not. Obviously, there's too much that direction too, where you're not doing anything to plan for your future, and then the future you is in trouble. That's literally the fundamental conflict of being human is balancing now versus later. Because now exists, and I know what it is, and my body exists, and it's here. And the future doesn't exist and my body has no ability to interact with it. It's just an idea I have, but I'm able to map it to some degree with some utility and accuracy. So how do I balance that? And I think generally the reason I'm advocating more for engaging with enjoyment in the moment and blah, 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 is because generally in our culture, especially the people that identify as neurodivergent, especially the people that we tend to work with, are at this point projecting so far into the future. I mean, decades, even like after they're dead, you know, people will sit and think like people will be crippled by an anxiety about climate change and what that will do to the world after they're gone. Which is not something that I'm saying it's not worth worrying about, especially if you are someone who can do something about it. You know, if you're a climate scientist or, you know, engineer or whatever, not that you have to be that to do something, but it should be proportionate. The extent to which I can solve that problem, I want to think about it and deal with it to that extent, not just sit around and be unable to do anything, including the things like this, where I have more of an ability to engage and be productive and helpful because I'm crippled by that fear. So healthy and unhealthy, addicted, not addicted, productive, work, all these concepts, the reason that they're not great is because they're so simplistic and they encourage, incentivize looking further and further and further forward. Is what I'm doing healthy? Means, will this someday cause some kind of unknowable problem for me? Yes or no? And then I'm trying to make every decision in the moment based on what might happen later on. You just got to balance it. And we tend to be too out of balance in terms of sacrificing now for later. And we want to bring that. Some people do it the other way.
I'd love to go into specifics another time. We're almost out of time, but I think it would be good to talk more about tension because I would be curious about like, how do you measure it? How do you keep aware of it? How do you...
Well, I'll say right off the bat, you can't do it correctly. That's the whole point. Which, you know, we have like guidelines and frameworks and we want to like keep an eye on it. But the whole point is that it's tension. You just do your best until you recognize that you missed something or made some mistake or something's bad. And then you...
I just pictured a bowling alley with like the bumpers. If you say that.
Pretty much that.
And I would shame myself. I'm like, I don't need the bumpers. I need to be good at this, even though this is the third time I've bowled. No bumpers.
That's a great metaphor. No, it really is just about trying to balance out cognition, circling back to where we started, being in your head. Thinking and acting draw on the same resources. You can't do both of them at the same time. You can switch back and forth real quick, we call that being careful, and it makes you go real slow because you act and think and act and think and act and think instead of just acting without thinking. So you can't do both. And thinking, the future, and all this stuff, healthy, unhealthy, these are all thoughts, these labels. That's why I'm always pushing back against these words. They're thought things. It doesn't mean that they're not accurate or that they're not useful or they're not valued. They're valid, they're valuable, they're all those things. And they're all, what do I think about it, as opposed to what is actually happening. I drink too much is not necessarily a statement I would disagree with someone saying.
Yeah.
But what does that mean? How much do you drink? What makes that too much? How would you know if it is not? What's, you know, we need to make it more actionable. Otherwise, we all just sit around thinking about the things that we should be but aren't doing. So,
and that's why none of us are rubbish. And thank you for coming to this.
yeah, I know we got to go. I'm just going to say, be careful about saying need versus want. If you're going to say need, make sure you say that in order to. I need to, or else. I need to X in order to Y.
Yeah.
And if you're going to call something a distraction or an escape, just know that all that means is that you're centering, you're focused on the other thing that you're not paying attention to. This thing is just a distraction. Well, then what is the thing you're saying that you should have been focusing on instead? And if the problem ever is that I don't like how I'm feeling, something internally, right? I'm depressed, I'm angry, I'm anxious, whatever. If that's the problem and I engage, then nothing can be a distraction from the problem. If I am anxious and I'm doing something, and while doing that thing, I am no longer anxious, that's a solution to the problem, not a distraction from it. If afterwards you go back to being anxious, sometimes that means that there is something that is causing you to be anxious, and that thing needs to be addressed. But your experience of anxiety, the only way to address it is to do something which makes you not anxious. The number of clients I have who are like, I'm so depressed, and then I do this thing, and sure, I'm happy for a while, but it's just an escape. Like, yeah, that's the point, though. If you're not feeling depressed, good. Even if it is for 4 hours, even if you do go back to being depressed afterwards, then that was a break. And you are a lot better prepared to do whatever else you might find beneficial.
And I've noticed with clients where if you have enough of those 4 hours, sometimes your time in between becomes, you might be like, you know, a 4 out of 10 depressed instead of like a 7 out of 10 if you were to not do any of the enjoyable 4 hour.
Sometimes I think it's like grief, where by the time that you feel like you've quote unquote solved it or whatever is the first time that you're like, oh, wait a second, I forgot about the fact that I've been depressed. It's been so long that I haven't thought about it. You know, it doesn't ever go away. Like people talk about grief that way, that when you think about the person, it will hit you. You don't feel less sad about missing. You just think about it less frequently. If time goes on and you move on to other things and pay attention to other stuff. So get yourself out of your head. Me, Brandon, if you're in your head, Brandon, do some stuff, Brandon, including playing video games, even if you feel guilty about doing that. Brandon. That is what helped me. I played a game on my phone for 15 minutes. And I felt guilty about it, but I made myself do it. You got to just not feel guilty. If that's what it is that gets you out of your head, then do it. Unless you got a better idea. Don't just sit around and say, no, I should be able to get myself out of my head by thinking about in my head how I should not be in my head. Or talking, by the way, for me.
I have so many
I know.
comments, but we're out of time.
Thank you, Kate.
We'll have to pick it up again next week. Thank you both. It's been really nice to be with you all. This was fun.
Thank you, Marie.
Yeah, you're lots of fun, Marie.
Likewise.
Thank you all.
Try not to be rubbish.
All right.
Okay.
Have a good week, everybody. Bye-bye.